Hello, welcome on discussion today. How passenger rail is affected by the COVID-19 measures, what recent weeks meant for passenger rail operators, what it will take to shift to rail again. And I'm sure you heard about bailouts of European member states towards airline companies. Is rail treated equally? My name is Barbara Mičková. I'm policy officer in ALLRAIL, Alliance of Rail New Entrants and Independent Ticket Vendors. We aim for passenger-driven, innovative, competitive rail by opening rail sector to competition. And together, today, together with my colleague Nick Brooks, Secretary General of ALLRAIL, and some of our members, we will update you about the recent development in the passenger rail sector. I would like to welcome Ines Volpert, Chief Communication Officer of WESTbahn in Austria, Mats Johannesson from MTRX operating in Sweden, Andrea Giuricin, Senior Consultant of Italo, operating in Italy, and Francois Coart from Getlink, Rail and Intermodal Development Director. And also Nick Brooks, Secretary General of ALLRAIL, as I said before. I would like to start with MTR, with Mats. So, Mats, can you describe your operations before COVID? What were your expectations for this spring and this summer?
Yeah.
And how it turned out? Can you describe past almost 2 months of your operations?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, it's been completely different from both what we were looking forward to and planning for. Just a quick look back. I mean, we've been into operation on the Stockholm-Gothenburg route for 5 years now, seeing year-by-year growth, both in terms of having the market growing, but also us taking market share. And especially in Sweden, we've seen from the summer of 2018, we've seen a very strong shift from airlines down to railway, very much driven by the urge for people to travel more sustainable. So, I mean, coming into this year, we've had quite an offensive agenda, spending a lot of money on marketing, opening new destinations, and really was planning to elevate from the underlying market conditions. Had a good January, February, then entering March, and then basically from mid-March, I would say, when the Swedish authorities sharpened their recommendations, also having people not traveling domestically as a recommendation, we've seen the market more or less disappear. So I think we had 3 or 4 weeks with actually net negative revenues. So we actually had more cancellations than we had new bookings, which is definitely a first, hopefully a last also. But I mean, that is something that we couldn't see it coming, and it's also been much worse than we actually anticipated. From that, we've seen revenues growing, but they've grown extremely slow. And when we closed last week, we are still losing over 90% of the revenues that we were planning for. So, I mean, we've been on the commercial side heavily affected. That of course has led us to act. So, I mean, losing all revenues, we are forced to act on the cost side. But we are an operation with quite a high degree of fixed costs, so it's extremely. I mean, it's impossible for us to cover the gap, of course. But we've been taking down services, so we've reduced the number of services with about 60 to 70% to reduce the damage, so to say. But still, I mean, we have a financial situation that is difficult, but we also would like to take our responsibility being an important part of the infrastructure, because we still have people who are healthy and in need of to travel between Sweden's 2 largest cities, and we want to be part of that. So we want to have services still running, although at a reduced level, of course. So we're heavily affected, going through all costs, taking out all marketing, of course, using short-term layoffs as is one thing that is introduced by the government in Sweden, that we're able to for a short period of time having people laid off at different percentages. So that is used throughout the organization, but we are in an extremely difficult situation financially, of course.
Okay, I was really surprised because it seems that Sweden invented flick-scum flight shaming, and we really had impressive figures from last year. I think it was 4% decrease of people traveling by plane, and it was 6% increase in EU. So the trend towards rail was quite massive in Sweden. So then I was quite surprised when the only news I heard from transportation sector was bailout towards airline industry, and I think it was $500 billion. It was for 155 billion for guarantee scheme to support airlines affected by coronavirus outbreak, and nothing for rail. Is it still the case that it's nothing for rail?
No, but I mean that is a correct description of what has happened. I think that was depending on two things. I think it was partly due to the fact that government started off saying that you shouldn't travel internationally, and that of course is affecting airlines more heavily. But then also I think they are stronger in communicating the situation. I think they have experience from different kind of crises that has actually put them, more on their feet, being able to describe the situation and also influencing, of course, important stakeholders. So yes, that is the background. In terms of things that has been implemented in Sweden, we have the short-term layoffs, but that is used by all businesses and industries, so it isn't directed towards railways. They've also actually last week introduced a new turnover support. So for companies that have lost more than 30% of turnover, you're able to get some part of the fixed cost covered for, but that is also industry-wide, so it isn't aimed toward railway. Also rent is able to be covered by that. So we haven't really seen anything that is directed towards railway industry so far. We are very much talking about the need of having infrastructure fees reduced or taken away for a period of time, both right now during the existing crisis, but also as a way of actually making sure that we have a start over that is with the sustainable travel in focus. So no, we're still lacking programs or initiatives aiming for the railway industry.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe one more thing one more news from Sweden. On Monday, ALLRAIL reported and informed that Swedish government issued a report on a national ticketing system for all public transport. And the report describes what MTRX, but also others have been complaining about quite a long time, and about unequal access to online rail ticket channels and of the incumbent. Can you describe what happened and what do you think will happen next, and what it will mean to you and to passengers?
Yeah, it's important news. Going back to 2018, we filed a complaint to the Swedish competition authorities on the STI online issue. In April 2019, the competition authorities basically confirmed our view, agreed with our problem description, but they also stated the fact that the competition law isn't a toolbox, so to say, to actually resolve the situation. So they wrote a formal letter to the Minister of Infrastructure and the government, basically asking them to address the issue. So they initiated a government review in August last year, where this was one part, with the purpose of actually launching a national ticketing system, and that was presented last week. And very, very happily, the review is very much confirming what we've said and what the competition authorities also have said, and what several politicians is saying also at the moment. So they are confirming, and they're also actually showing on a number of different alternatives for a solution that is quite easily accomplished. What we're looking for right now is, of course, that the government is taking this review and putting it into practice, I would say.
Well, for us, for ALLRAIL, we really welcome it, as ticketing is a really big part of obstacles for newcomers, and it gives us hope that when we will re-incentivize people to travel by train, the ticketing will be an essential part of it. So when rail system will start with second breath, it's much stronger with better ticketing.
Yeah, I'm totally agree. And I mean, I think in terms of the start of it, we need to have money spent wisely to make sure that we have a sustainable travel restart. And the ticketing system is one important part, of course, that is done without cost, basically.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck for next week.
Yeah, thanks.
I would like to continue with Andrea Giuricin, Senior Advisor of Italo. Italo served as outstanding example of for ALLRAIL and of what competition can do on track with red high speed fleet. They managed to really do the shift rail, the modal shift from other means of transportation to rail. With reduced fares, better services, but also better trains, and not just your trains, but also it increased the level of service of your competitor, of the incumbent. So I think you are really the flagship of what competition can do, and also in like the most sustainable goals towards Green Deal. So that was the nice situation before COVID came. What is the situation now?
Yeah, the situation was very good for the consumer, was very good in terms of environment. You know, as you told Barbara, it's very interesting that the Italian case was a really good case. And what we ask and what we expect, that the future will be the same for the consumer and will be the same for the environment. This is the goal, I suppose, not only for a rail company, but for a government. This is the first point. The second point is what's happened with the COVID. The demand decreased around more than 99%. So the demand decreased more than 99%. This is huge impact, very huge impact. And this has to be taken in account when the government has to intervene, because the decrease in the high-speed rail in Italy was bigger than in the airlines. So this is very important to take in mind. For this reason, I prepare just a few slides that I will take just 5 minutes, if it's okay for you,
yeah,
just
sure.
to share with some data, because it's important to know some data. So as we told, the impact is very strong. If we take in terms of supply, this is the last week of March, so still not at the beginning, but after less than 1 month or after 1 month, as you can see, the Italian high speeds have a reduction of 97% of the offer. If we take the airlines in Europe, the decrease was 86%, around 86%. So the impact was stronger in the high-speed rail in Italy than the airlines system all around Europe. This is very important to take in mind, the first point. So more impact on the high-speed line. The second element that has to be taken in mind is that, of course, when the demand will restart, because we start the phase 2 in Italy, so now we are thinking how to restart the service, we have to take in mind that the lower demand means that it's more difficult to fill a train than to fill a plane. I give you just 2 examples. This is a quite small train of Italo with 462 seats, and the other is a typical Airbus 320 that is used by EasyJet, for example, just an example. So if we will have less passenger that will travel in the future, for us will be much more complex to have the more numbers or high number of passengers than to have for the plane. And I'm not speaking yet about social distancing, because if different measure of social distancing will be taken for different for the sector, well, we'll have a very huge impact on that. The second element is that right now, in many cases, we are on the same market. This is the example that was used also by Bloomberg, this graph that I created a few taken part of the market in the last years. So right now, between Milan and Rome, well, quite 80% of the market is for the rail. So what's happened, and is a little bit more complex. So what is needed right now to attack the crisis of coronavirus? So imagine that you have 70% load factor before the crisis, and with 15% of EBIT margin. This is just an example. Now, imagine that you put a higher or a maximum load factor of 50% on board of your train. Imagine that the demand is lower. So probably the load factor will decrease to 50%, and the EBIT margin probably will stay minus 15%, because the cost is, you will have the same cost. So what is important to do if you pass to 50% load factor is to try to increase or to come back at the situation that was similar before. And the only way in Italy is one way that we promote in terms of in front of the government is to decrease the access charge. Access charge many times in the case of Italy is very high. So we are fighting, or we are proposing to decrease the access charge, just the markup part that is linked to the ability to pay, so we can have a positive margin also for the next month when the demand will be very low. So this is a very important point to take in mind. Be careful that the markup, the component B of the access charge, is linked to the ability to pay. And with no demand, there's no ability to pay. And what we have to pay attention that if we compare with the low-cost airlines, where Italo was more competitive in terms of cost against a lot of low cost, if we take different social distancing measure due for a health reason, social distancing will be different, probably the cost for the train will be higher than the low cost. So we will put out of the market the train or the rail because we will take different measure on the social distancing. And I go to the last point. So what is taken in the last month? What we saw right now that in the rail, there's quite no intervention. There will be Ines that will speak about what's happened to Austria, but it's a quite unique case. We saw what's happened in US because Donald Trump put $1 billion just for the passenger sector, for Amtrak, that is a monopolist. But in the aviation, we have a full of intervention. Here, just very short press release from my interview for Reuters about Alitalia. They received €500 million directly. We start to see in many countries that many airlines will receive a lot of money. So my question is, we are not against that the airline system or airline sector could be helped in this moment, but what we needed that due to the fact, as we saw, we are a direct competitor in many cases, why the intervention has to be different between airlines and rail sector? Is the European Commission and every member state want to go in the direction that airlines is favorite against the rail? No, we think that we have to be treated in the equal mode. So this is very important point to be taken because the reduction of access charge in Italy will be a strong impact on the strong impact also for the demand. So will help the demand for the next month because we will be not in a normal situation probably for the next 12, 18 months. This is a little bit the point, and all the health measure that will be taken, remember, there's a cost for that. There's investment that you have to do. So if this cost is gone for the railway company, how will be paid this kind of health measure? Because if we saw there's no demand, but we have an increase of cost, how to continue to offer the service, the best offer to our customer? This is a little bit the point of my presentation, and it's just a few points that I hope could be help the European Commission to take the right decision to not to favor one sector, but just to go in the same direction.
Okay, Francois, you had a question.
Yes, please. Could you go back to your slide about the profitability versus the load factor, if I'm correct? What does mean the orange curve and what does mean the blue curve?
This is what is normally the market that is taken by different operator. What we saw in Italy that is very interesting also for politicians that they want to go for a greener solution in terms of transportation, that with a high-speed line that is in competition, we saw that the number of kilometers that are covered by the rail instead of air, so the market is going larger and larger. That means that also a Turin-Naples that is quite 6 hours by train right now there's a very strong part of the market that is going to the rail, to the high-speed rail, and not to the aviation, because there's also other benefits to use the train. For example, you have free Wi-Fi, you can work on board of the train, the price is very low. So this is very important. So the orange is just where arrived the market. In the Y, you have the cost per available kilometers, and here you have the length. Normally, what we saw that we can expand the part of the rail, and this is very important. So if we increase our cost, we will go much more than in the aviation because of social distancing measure, the risk that we will lose a part of the market as rail. And I think that the European Commission has the opposite objective or the opposite target, and not only the European Commission, but also different governments, the opposite target. So if the rail is important because it's greener, we have to take attention not to increase the cost or to try to decrease, to take some measure to decrease the cost in this moment. That is a wide crisis that we never saw before, minus 99% of the passenger, more than 99% of the passenger.
May I ask a question? Because so far, even when we follow the discussion and what the Council and the Commission said is basically, well, we had some tools. We started the temporary framework, but then it's on member states what they will do, and we will use greener and more sustainable tools afterwards in a multi-annual financial framework. What do you expect from this approach? Because we see that the member states are not really fast in terms of helping rail, and then starting later without any like bridging funds for rail to survive it. How do you anticipate that the rail sector will look like?
So it's very important that they don't have to be faster than aviation, but they have to be enough fast as the aviation. So it's important that we go at the same speed, because even if the rail is out of the market, and I think it's not the objective of the European Commission or of the member state. They told clearly many times what is the objective. So if the objective is something like that, we have to take right now some measure, economic measure for the rail. Then we can think how to make in every country. We will see the Austrian case is completely different from the proposal in Italy, but it's important to go in this direction of helping also the rail sector in this moment where the demand is not there. Minus 99% of the demand is a clear sign there's no demand anymore.
Can you sum up negotiation with the Italian government? Is there a progress already? Because I remember that there was long time almost nothing, but I hope that there is a slight progress.
There's development. I don't know if it's progress, but
okay.
There's development on that. In terms, the discussion is continuing. We know also then from the infrastructure manager, they start to study something about the access charge. Of course, we have also to pay attention that have no impact on the infrastructure manager. So the fact that we have to go all the rail sector together, because if we increase the contribution to the infrastructure manager because of the COVID, that contribution has to arrive to the railway undertaking to decrease the access charge. I think it's very important to go all together in this direction. Of course, this is a solution for Italy that could be applied or could be applied differently in other countries, because you can have a different economic measure that could be taken. But what is important that we have the economic measure as was taken in the aviation sector, at least.
Okay, but apparently it's not the same speed as in aviation.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, and good luck. Ines.
Hi.
Hello. This is my hope and a really positive example from Austria, because Austria seemed to be, unfortunately, the only country that started measures, the safe and healthy measures, also hand in hand with economical measures. Can you explain your operations before COVID and then after COVID? What measures you taken as WESTbahn, but also the measures that were taken by the government?
Okay, yes. Let me start by telling everyone that as happy as I am about our situation as WESTbahn, I do really hope from the bottom of my heart, after hearing all those stories about other companies and other countries, that everyone comes through this crisis and that rail will come out strengthened. I do hope. I don't know if that will happen, but I do hope it from the bottom of my heart. Our situation is very special, I think, at least from what I heard so far. And Austria has actually not been an example of strong competition in the last years, but I think there were several good developments in that area. One of them being that we have a new government, and we have a new minister of transport. And obviously they've realized that it's important to have a strong competition in the rail market. So we as WESTbahn, we had to cut our service from 2 lines that we had serviced until last December down to 1 line, but that was not in relation to the COVID crisis, because we decided to sell our fleet to Deutsche Bahn in 2 steps. So the first part of our fleet went to Germany already, so we had to cut down to 1 line. And we were actually doing quite good on this 1 line. We had a lot of passengers. We usually don't give passenger numbers and any data, but just to illustrate the development, which is actually the same as in Sweden, as in Italy and in other countries. I will give you some numbers. We have an average passenger number of 10 to 15,000 passengers a day. And we saw that rate drop down to below 1,000 passengers in mid-March. So that is also a drop in demand of about 90 to 95%, which is of course unbearable if you do a commercially viable traffic. Just to explain the situation in Austria, we have a very strong incumbent, ÖBB, and they actually they have a PSO for almost all other routes, except for the Vienna-Salzburg line, which is an economically viable route. We do that, and ÖBB does it without any PSO order on a normal basis. And so when the COVID crisis started, what we did as a company was, first of all, we introduced Kurzarbeit, as most other companies also did. And the second thing is that we in 2 or 3 steps, we reduced our regular offer down to about 1/3 of the regular offer that we usually did before. And at that time, when we realized that we could not sustain that in the long time, we approached the Ministry of Climate Protection, and we asked them for this temporary PSO that we, as well as ÖBB, then received starting April 20th and so far for 3 months. That means it will run until the beginning of July. And there's an option to prolong this temporary PSO for another 3 months. So it's actually 3 times 1 month. I think that they will, of course, have a look at the circumstances and then decide whether they would prolong it for 1, 2, or 3 months. What we do is we as WESTbahn, we offer a 2-hourly takt starting from Wien Westbahnhof, but not running via Hütteldorf as we usually do, but we're running via Meidling and then on to Salzburg. So that's a 2-hourly takt that we do. It's 9 train pairs per day, but it's a combined offer with ÖBB. So they also do a 2-hourly takt, and both takts combined result in a 1-hour takt, which is very good for the people, the passengers, because it also includes a mutual ticket acceptance. So this means that passengers who have a WESTbahn ticket, they can also use that ticket in an ÖBB train and vice versa. There are no promotional offers at the moment, so we don't sell any. ÖBB does not sell any, so it's just the standard fare tickets that are mutually accepted, of course, including annual passes and stuff like this. We also do 3 additional stops that we usually don't do. It's Tullnerfeld, St. Valentin, and Neumarkt-Köstendorf. This is important for the regional traffic that is connected to those places, so that really everybody has a very valid and stable means of traveling. We receive, for the first 3 months, we will receive 8.3 million euros from the Ministry of Climate Protection. And depending on whether this will be prolonged or not, we will receive an additional sum. But so far, it's the 3 months and the 8.3 million euros. ÖBB receives more than us, so they have a as far as I know, it's 40 million euros that ÖBB receives. But in addition to this 2 hourly tax, they also intensify the offer with additional trains. So they do a bigger offer and they receive more money for it.
Thank you very much. What I really like about WESTbahn story is first of all that it came quite fast. All the measure came quite fast. You, like all players, not just WESTbahn but also ÖBB, as an operator, also as an infrastructure manager, and also the government, you really share the same objectives.
It's a good thing, and I think they've understood that in the long term or in the midterm, it's important to have a competition in the rail market. And this is actually, it's a very good example, first of all, on an economic side, but it's also a good example because, as you will know, ÖBB and we have not been best friends in the past, and we have a lot of competition on the one side, but also legal things running. So it's a good thing also for it's good for the people to give them a stable infrastructure and stable possibilities to travel if they have to at this moment.
Yeah, I think, well, this is what all are discussing, that crisis can bring bad moments, but also maybe opportunities. And WESTbahn in Austria is a clear example that it can be a really good opportunity. Also in terms of ticketing, it's not ideal yet, but it's a great step forward. And I would hope that not just WESTbahn and Austria will keep it after the COVID crisis.
I do hope so too, yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Francois, hello.
Hello.
You have a really good position, as you can see the whole problem from the position of freight, passenger, infrastructure. Also, you can describe what the situation is in France, and how do you see, or if you can describe the latest development, and how do you see the future of passenger rail?
I will speak for my own company. We, as everybody, have been impacted by the COVID because we have two activities. The first, this is the operator of a shuttle trains in the Channel Tunnel. And there we have on freight, so the transport of trucks, we are more or less running at 60% of the normal turnover. So definitely we are impacted, of course, by the decrease of activity, but also by social distancing, because the truck drivers, they have to be transported in a passenger coach with social distancing, which is drastically limiting the capacity. The next thing, this is the transportation of private car. It's about 10%, and definitely fully impacted because the border is closed only for, let's say, emergency traffic, or people having being able to give a justification. If you take the second activity as infrastructure manager, it's highly impacted because Eurostar, unfortunately, is operating only one return train to Brussels, one return train to Paris a day. So definitely it's really an emergency traffic. It's the same roughly for most mainline traffic in France, in the magnitude of 10% maximum. Commuter traffic is a little bit better, but definitely. The key problem that we are facing for the time being, this is that the government is imposing to the operator social distancing plus the mask wearing. And especially for operators in dense urban conditions, it's very difficult to guarantee the social distancing in suburban traffic. Also for private operators in urban PSO, for instance, as Transdev, etc., how do you want, if the activity is taking over, to guarantee social distancing in a dense area? That is the key problem. And that generates a question. This is the legal exposure of the operator, because in France, maybe more than in some other European countries, the operators are legally extremely exposed. And that has to be solved, and I think there needs to be a EU solution to release, to some extent, the burden of the legal obligation from the operator to the state. It's extremely also important that should there be any toll reduction, that the infrastructure manager is being compensated. Because especially in France, we had a very big backlog of work. So in other states, the network, the conventional network was in a very poor state. And there was an enormous effort done in order to recover. And if they decrease the tolls, which is something that is really one of the options, the infrastructure manager must not stop its work or its development. That is really key. So it needs to be able to invest. For the private infrastructure manager, the customers and the state must not forget that they have to repay the debt of their investment, and they are suffering as the operators because they have no income, no train, no income. So this is something which must be taken into account. So definitely, unfortunately, unlike Sweden, unlike Austria, for the time being, we do not see clear program to compensate the operators from the state. We have also to be extremely cautious that the historic operators do not take this opportunity. Opportunity is maybe a wrong word, but do not take the crisis as a way to be recapitalized if they were loss-making, especially, for instance, in the freight. This is a key danger. Don't want that the COVID crisis is a way to offset, for instance, the debt which has been accumulated in the other year. Also, should there be any support, it has to be given to everybody in a clear way, which sometimes is not obvious. Then it was raised by Andrea and several other speakers that yes, definitely it looks that there is a priority to support the national French air carrier Air France, but we see nothing for the rail yet. So to some extent, the message is clearly do not forget rail. Rail is as affected as the air operator. Now, in France, there is something which we have which is an opportunity maybe for new entrants. It is that Air France has been recapitalized by several billions, but in exchange, they have to some extent release pressure on their national network. So first, we have to see if it is really something which is consequent, because some people are telling it's only on minor capacity they will release. And if yes, yes, this is really, I think, an opportunity for new entrants to enter on the open access market. For your information, we are also entering the market of passenger operation in cooperation with RATP Development. And of course, this will be because in France, the pressure on the competition is made more on PSO, so tunnel traffic. All the COVID crisis must not delay, for whatsoever reason, the process of tendering those PSOs.
That was my further question. So because we are currently in transition period, so we thought that we will be in difficult phase, not because of coronavirus, but because of opening of the rail market. So from 2019 until 2023, we should be in transition period, and after 2023, all contracts shall be tendered, not directly awarded. And what we were witnessing in the past years before COVID crisis, and maybe it will be after COVID crisis again, that there was strengthening of the current BSO contracts and strengthening of the status quo. So how do you think that opening of the market will be affected? Will COVID be excuse for protecting the status quo, or it might be opportunity to open the market as we see?
It's a very difficult question, because definitely this is for the time being till 2020 a political decision. So you have regions, so PTAs, which took the decision to open to a certain extent, so 20%, for instance, of the traffic, to not a lot, so or some decided to not open. So I do not know yet if the COVID crisis will definitely have an influence. It is for sure that if it is continuing social distances, mask together, etc., for a very long period, that will definitely affect the transportation and the interest of a new entrant. So this must be considered really as transitory short-time measures. We need especially to get rid of that as soon as possible. The next thing after this is definitely the transmission of information. A lot of information are coming from SNCF Réseau, the infrastructure manager, or SNCF itself, the operator. COVID crisis must not be an opportunity of an excuse to delay the process of transmission of the information. That is key. So definitely, I hope that the COVID will not be an opportunity to change the mind of the PTAs, the region wanting. What is something extremely also important, this is open access transport and cross-border open access. So I'm thinking Thalys-like operation, Eurostar-like operation, or also the Italian Trenitalia is having also open access project in France. Definitely we need also, if we are reopening national traffic, we need to reopen as soon as possible cross-border traffic. So, for instance, you have people speaking about quarantines for foreigners, including EU citizens. This is definitely a nonsense. We need to think on a European base, and if possible, a unified European base. Otherwise, that will be absolutely discoordinated, and that will definitely harm the business.
That's really important statement. Thank you very much, Francois. Nick Brooks, Secretary General of ALLRAIL. I have two final questions for you. If you can tell, why do you think it's happening? Why do you think that all member states are only focusing on airlines, and they seem that there is no rail and no one talks about rail? And when there are some measures on rail, it's only about freight and green lanes, but not so much on passenger. And maybe the second question is if you can summarize what passenger rail and ALLRAIL was asking so far in the rescue plan, and where we are if there is a positive development.
Okay, well, I'll start with the first one. So about aviation, yes, you are totally right. And I think many of the colleagues have said this already today, that there's been a lot of focus placed on aviation. And most airlines in Europe are commercially driven. They are, in a sense, open access, just like our railway operators, and they are privately owned or independently owned. And they've done, admittedly, the airline lobby has done a very good job of having a high profile in the media, warning almost every day over the last couple of months about the effects of services being cut, but also jobs. And they've done a very good job of that. So you've had, and essentially there is a united front, largely by the low-cost airlines and legacy carriers, which has been very effective. And we see examples like in Sweden, I think it was a €500 million support scheme launched a couple of weeks ago in the form of credit guarantees for any airline that holds a license to operate in Sweden. But look at the commercially driven open access rail operators in Sweden. They're not given the same treatment. And so this scheme is clearly discriminated against them, considering that they compete on the same domestic routes within the same country. So as Francois said, you can't forget rail. In this whole debate, you cannot forget rail. But at the same time, our members, the private, smaller, new entrant passenger rail operators of various sizes, they are not incumbents. And what have the incumbents been doing over the last couple of months? On the whole, incumbents have been largely silent because they can afford to wait and ask for compensation indirectly through special channels from their owners, which are the governments. After all, they are state-owned. I mean, look at the example today in the news in Germany, how Deutsche Bahn, which is an open access operator, long-distance operator within Germany, it's still state-owned. And we think it's going to get a special subsidy direct from the government, which is being done under the grounds that it's a kind of appreciation for the fact that Deutsche Bahn long-distance trains have maintained their services despite the economic instability of the times. So they're kind of going to get an imposed subsidy, and essentially that shuts out other smaller open access privately owned operators from getting access to the same subsidy. So that's not fair. So essentially, it's not just a question of getting rail exposure, but within the rail industry, we need to show that new entrant private operators that they get treated the same way as the state-owned incumbents. And unfortunately, in neither cases we've been that successful so far. So there are a few good cases, like in Austria. We were talking about Austria earlier on, but there is going to be a temporary PSO for a commercial open access operator, WESTbahn. Unfortunately, we haven't seen many other examples of that yet. We're still hoping that there will be something in the near future in one of the other countries, such as in Italy or Czech Republic or Sweden, maybe. That would be really good. I think Austria is definitely a role model. Also, as some of you have already said today, what happens if there's social distancing? What happens if trains, for a certain point of time until a vaccine is found, are only allowed to be half full or 1/3 full? Clearly, that's not going to be financially sustainable for railway operators to survive, especially open access ones that don't get subsidy. So if that is to be the case, if there is to be a longer period of social distancing, then we also hope that open access operators will get help through a temporary PSO. So on the whole, we haven't really seen that much help around Europe. We don't really see much of a reduction in access charges. However, it is very important. It's not just a question of ensuring liquidity. Liquidity isn't just ensured through more state subsidies, also ensured through reducing costs, cutting costs. And access to state-owned infrastructure, stations, service facilities, rolling stock parking needs to be implemented as soon as possible. Not just that, but beyond 2020, for as long as the recovery period takes place. I would say probably well into 2021, because open access operators will need to recover. They need to win customers back, and it won't happen straight away. So certainly helping with the access charges for a long period of time would be very useful. And I think my final statement is that all of these things I've just talked about, whether it's temporary PSOs or reductions in access charges, they're all things that are under the control of the member states. The states are the ones, they're the entities that decide in this crisis where compensation can be paid or where costs can be cut. It's entirely up to member states. So, it's under the control of the governments, and now they have to act. Otherwise, we really fear for the future of market opening in Europe.
Maybe we can also add that currently there's work ongoing on multi-annual financial framework, and we would like to urge all stakeholders that it's ensured that there is direct help in the meanwhile to the sector, so they can all players can survive and competition can survive. until we have really multi-annual financial framework tools on table, which wouldn't happen until end of this year. And then we will have clear condition especially on direct help, especially on track access charges, as Nick just described. And it's not just for this year, but it's also for the following year, because this situation won't change from the day. And also that Commission, but also the member states will stick to the plan of opening up the sector and opening up the rail and establishing single European rail area. And this can't happen without competition. Yeah. Thank you very much to all our guests today. Thank you very much for those who are listening to us. We would like to welcome you if you have any comments to send us an email or contact us on info@allrail.eu. We will provide you also on indeed contact in the podcast link and also in the YouTube link. And we hope that you can help us to save rail and also to save better multimodal and sustainable European transportation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye-bye.